Hey there, welcome back to Parent Circles. I'm Jessica, I use she, her pronouns, and this is my co-host Trent.
Hi, my name is Trent. I use he, him, his, and they, them, theirs pronouns. And thank you for tuning into Parent Circles. Parent Circles is a YouTube series all about tips, tricks, strategies, and information that parents and caring adults can use when talking with young people in their lives.
So we know that through studies and research that most parents and caring adults are the primary sex and sexuality educators to young people in their life. And that's great. We love that. But we want to make sure that adults have the skills to have effective, safe, healthy, and comfortable conversations with those young people. So today's a really great topic.
Yeah, today we're going to be talking about communication styles and strategies. Young people get information from so many different places, but one of the most trustworthy and consistent places they get it from are parents and caring adults. The agenda for today, we're going to be talking about communication styles, response patterns, then we're going to be talking about the RISE model, the REACT model, door slammers, which we'll cover what those are in a little bit.
Well, let's get started with our communication styles. So many people have heard of passive, assertive, or aggressive. Maybe some people are really good at determining when one of those communication styles come up, or maybe some come naturally and we're like, oops, I shouldn't have used that one. So we're going to learn about those communication styles just so if it ever comes up, people can understand how that might affect a young person learning about sex or sexuality.
Absolutely.
So first, let's talk about passive communication. I don't know. I think it comes up when people might be uncomfortable about a topic, they don't know about the topic, or they're just tired and don't want to talk about it. So let's kind of show y'all what passive looks like. Trent, ask me a question.
Jess, can you tell me a little bit more about the clitoris?
I think that you're too young to learn about the clitoris right now. That's kind of discrediting what Trent actually wants to learn about.
Yeah.
And I'm not giving any answers. So that's kind of passive.
I'm 23.
How about this one? So, hey, Trent, what happens when a person goes through puberty?
I don't know, and I don't want to know.
Trent brings up a really good point. Sometimes a way that a person is being passive is by not showing interest in the conversation or not willing to look up the information. We have Google. You can easily look it up. So if someone's not willing to, then they might be passive. So is there another way that passive communication comes up when we talk about sexuality? Oh, in your body language. So when someone is showing that they're not interested, they're not giving full undivided eye contact and attention, it could show that they're being passive. So let's talk a little bit about aggressive communication. So aggressive communication could be coming from the adult or the young person. Let's give a little bit of a role play on when it happens with both people. All right, so let's say I find a condom digging through Trent's bathroom trash. Trent, why are you having sex?
Why are you going through my trash?
I don't know what to say anymore. We're kind of stuck there,
Yeah.
right? We're yelling at each other, we're jumping to conclusions, and there's really no room for conversation. I think aggressive communication could come up in so many different ways, where we're accusing people, where we're door slamming someone, which we'll talk about later, or maybe even people are getting physical.
Sure. Yeah. There's a lot of places that aggressive communication comes from. Frustration, uncomfortability, which we want to make sure and we state that those are totally normal reactions to have to a lot of different things, especially around sex and sexuality, but we're here to kind of work through those and make sure that everyone feels safe and comfortable having these conversations. Aggressive is not usually the best way to establish that safe and comfortable feeling.
There's many tactics that a person can do to avoid an aggressive conversation. One of those being just pause. Maybe they didn't have a condom because they were having sex. Maybe they were just trying to practice. Maybe it was somebody else's. Maybe they got it to protect themselves from STIs or pregnancy, and that should be applauded. So one of the things that a person can do is to just take a deep breath and pause, and then figure out the best way to continue the conversation. So another form of communication that a person could use is assertive communication. I like assertive. Why do we like assertive?
Assertive is often the most effective type of communication. It allows for folks to get their point across without coming off as aggressive, and yeah, I mean, that's basically it. We want to make sure that we're communicating in a clear way. Assertive is often the most clear way.
And also not being passive and getting taken advantage of or overstepping a boundary that a person has set themselves. So a way to be assertive is to let people know really what they want without being aggressive. So it's kind of cool.
If we go back to the conversation that we used earlier, where a parent or caring adult finds a condom and they want to have a conversation with their young person about it, what is another way that parent or caring adult could come at that conversation?
Ooh, that's a good example. So let's say we found the condom. Hey, Trent, I just want to let you know that I found a condom in the trash can when I was taking it out. Do you have any explanation for that?
I don't know. I don't know if I'm ready for this conversation.
Okay, so let's take some time and let me know when you're ready to have this conversation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Assertive conversations don't have to happen at that moment. They can come back to them. And that's okay too. I don't feel any sort of way that Trent didn't want to talk with me about it at that moment.
So, if you are caught off guard, it's important that you feel how you feel. We want to make sure that we're normalizing that because there are lots of different responses to these conversations and they really are all normal. An important thing to remember, though, is that keeping a calm attitude for these tough conversations makes them a lot easier. One way to take some space and calm down is to say something like, "Thank you for bringing this up. I don't really feel prepared to have a conversation about this right now, but I'm going to do some research, I'm going to find some information, and we can come back to it a little bit later. Let's set a time for insert time here."
Yeah, that's a really good point. And many people don't have that language comfortable at hand. So if a person wants, go ahead and practice. And it might feel weird and it might feel cheesy, but saying that gives a person a little bit of time to come back and meet a person where they're at and take out any sort of anger that might be associated with that behavior.
Absolutely. We're going to be moving on to reaction styles. These are empathy, sympathy, and apathy.
You love this topic.
I love this topic so much. It's my favorite thing. We're going to be focusing on how people come across whenever someone is talking to them and they're responding. And we're going to be talking about how sometimes we can do that intentionally and sometimes we can do that accidentally and what those responses might do for the person that we're talking to. Apathy is when someone comes across like they don't care about something, and this can come from a lot of different places, whether they're uncomfortable with the topic, whether they don't really understand the topic, or they don't feel like they have enough information to be an active participant in a conversation. However, apathy often comes across like someone doesn't care, and that can be really, really hard as a young person to receive from a parent or caring adult. One example that I give when I'm talking in classrooms is if someone comes out to someone saying that, I'm attracted to a gender that is similar to my own gender, a response might be, "I don't care," and I 110% get that instinct. But this person is choosing to share something about themselves, and this applies for a lot of different topics, whether they're curious about something, whether they want to try something, maybe they're going into their first relationships. It's important that we treat the information and their disclosure as being really important because it is really important. And so apathy is maybe not the most effective response tool in this situation. So sympathy is another form of a response that people can give. Sympathy is, I think, what a lot of people strive for. I think it's what, we're always encouraged to be sympathetic towards others.
Sounds good.
It sounds good. It does sound good. But sometimes sympathy doesn't come off that way, and we want to recommend this video by Brene Brown as a way of kind of explaining the difference between sympathy and empathy and how impactful empathy can be. So if you want to pause here, we're going to put a little break in the video, and you can go into the description below and check out Brene Brown's video on sympathy versus empathy, and then come back and we'll talk about it. So some key tips to engaging with young people in an empathetic way. The first one is to listen to them and believe them. What they're saying is their truth. It is important enough that they tried to share it with you, so it's important to believe them. A second key tip to keep in mind whenever empathizing with young people is to recognize their vulnerability in coming to you with something. It's not always easy for anyone to come to another person and say, "Hey, I need help, I'm confused, I need information," and so part of an empathetic response is recognizing that. A third key tip whenever it comes to responding in an empathetic way is if you don't know what to say that. It's totally fine to say, "Hey, I don't know, but I'm really glad that you told me." The last key tip that I'd like y'all to keep in mind is ask the person that you're engaging in this conversation with how they want the conversation to go. Like, "Hey, Do you want to be informed on this topic? Do you want some emotional support? Do you want feedback or advice? All of these options allow for them to kind of reclaim agency in their education, and honestly, it just makes someone feel good to have that choice.
Yeah, it's kind of like collaborating.
We'll talk about that a little bit later.
So earlier in the video, I talked with you all about this acronym that we know and love. And this acronym is called RISE. RISE stands for Reaffirm, Inform, Screen, and Encourage More Questions. Let's spend a little bit of time breaking down each of those acronyms and explaining how they're important with a young person and adult in a conversation.
Absolutely. So the first letter is R, which stands for Reaffirm. Reaffirm is whenever you validate that a young person's question was good, that it was impactful, that it was important, that it's valid, all of those things. One of the easiest ways to do that is by saying, thank you for that question. It's really important to me.
Yeah. And maybe if that's not an option, someone can say, I've always wanted to know that as well. Or, I'm really happy you asked. So these little bitty statements can mean so much to a young person who's nervous about asking their adult a question about sex or sexuality.
Absolutely.
Now that a person is reaffirmed and they've gotten the statement that proves that this is going to be a safe and productive conversation, we can go on to the I, which is really important.
So the I in RISE stands for Inform. Inform is when you actually provide the information, the answer to the question. Now, we know that there's a lot of information out there, and we know that it's kind of hard to know all of these things. And so we want to make sure that in the inform part, we also make space to say, hey, I actually don't know the answer to that question, but let's find out together, or I'll do some research and I'll come back to it. Any of those options are totally fine as long as the information that is being presented is accurate.
We love accuracy. And again, they can look it up if they don't know the answer. But also, it needs to be developmentally appropriate. There's a lot of times where us as educators, we've caught ourselves answering a question that a person asked, and we're just like, la 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 la, carrying on in this massively long tangent, and a young person is looking at us like we have three heads. So the best thing to do is to give it in short and digestible moments, and pay attention to the person that we're talking to make sure that their body language shows that they are not utterly confused.
Absolutely.
So the S in the RISE model stands for screen. And in order for an adult to make sure that the young person isn't absolutely utterly confused, they can screen to make sure that they are on the same page. And that kind of covers their back a little bit.
Absolutely.
So what does screen look like?
Screen can look a lot of different ways. I think the most common way that we use it is, does that make sense? Does that information sound right to you? Do you have any questions about that information?
Yeah. And that helps continue the conversation. It helps make sure that the adult answered the question that was being asked. And it helps them know if they should ask any more follow-up questions or provide some resources. So the S is really, really important, and we love screening, and it's sometimes not natural because as adults, maybe time is tight. We want to just give the information and carry on to work, but just a really quick screen can help show the young person that they care and that they're willing to provide more conversations at a later date or at that moment.
Speaking of providing more conversations, that brings us to E, which stands for encourage.
Yes, it's great.
Encourage means that we want to encourage more questions, future conversations. Keeping that communication and that dialogue open is essential in these conversations.
So some of the ways that people can encourage more questions are saying something like, I'm so happy that you asked. Please reach out to me anytime if you have more questions.
Or, hey, I really enjoyed this conversation. Let's talk about more stuff soon.
Yeah, so it's keeping the door open. It's going to have more conversations, and it also shows that more conversations of the same sort are welcome. So let's see what the RISE model looks like in action. I'll play an adult, and Trent, would you mind playing a neurotypical 12-year-old?
Sounds good.
Okay, so Trent, ask me a question.
Let's see. Hey, can you tell me, what is the clitoris?
That's a really good question, Trent. I'm so happy that you asked. A lot of people have questions about their bodies, or they have these body parts and they don't actually even know what they do. So thank you for being so interested in that topic. The clitoris is a bundle of nerves, typically around the vagina, and they're typically related parts. Do you have any questions about those typically related parts?
No. No, I think you've explained it pretty well so far.
Good. Well, if you ever have any more questions, please know that you can always reach out.
Okay, thank you.
So we had eye contact. We were probably being assertive. We were answering questions. We were providing information. We weren't rambling on or jumping to conclusions.
So that was a great example of a conversation that could potentially happen. But like I said, it's an example, and it can be used as kind of this baseline, this thing that we can practice over and over again until we get better at it. Like Jess mentioned before in the video, practice can only make us better in these scenarios. And when it comes to talking about these sensitive subjects, practice is going to make these conversations a lot easier.
And I like that you mentioned that this is not exclusively how the RISE model can be used. I think it's really important as coworkers or as siblings or really in any conversation that we have with any other human. It just feels really, really good. We always should check in on humans. I think it's a really important thing to practice empathetic listening and show that we actually care. So let's see what this could look like in just a regular, how are you sort of conversation. So Trent, you seem a little bit down. Is there anything that you'd like to talk to me about?
Thanks for asking. Honestly, I don't really feel like talking about it right now, but maybe we can talk about it a little bit later. Would you want to talk about it later?
Of course.
Okay. Yeah, like I said, thank you for asking. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So Trent knows that I care, but I'm not prying. And Trent's able to be embodying the RISE model even when they're just not feeling it. So that's kind of a way that the RISE model works both ways on two sides of the conversation. So you should practice the RISE model with someone in your family.
In order to help move some of that practicing along, we're going to put a couple of example scenarios in the description of this video. Please feel free to check those out.
So now we know the RISE model. It's great, it works, it feels good, but sometimes it doesn't always happen. So we have another acronym for people to use if maybe they didn't respond properly. And that other model is called
React.
The React model.
Between RISE and React, there's this really important topic that we want to talk about. It's intention versus impact. A lot of times we intend to come off one way or to say one thing and have it land a specific way, but often that's not the impact that it actually has.
Yeah, sometimes people say, oh, they mean well, or assume best intent. And what that's doing is diminishing the person's feelings and also not addressing what someone needs to develop their understanding upon.
For example, if someone accidentally steps on someone else's toes, this is a common everyday thing. It doesn't mean anything. It wasn't intended to happen. But the reality is that toes were stepped on and now one person is hurt. Recognizing that that hurt is real, that that's that person's lived experience, that that's their truth, that's what's going on with them, is really important. We have to recognize that a person is going through something and that we might be at least partially at fault for it. And that kind of brings us to the first part of the React model.
So the first part of the React model is to recognize. So like Trent said, recognize we stepped on someone's foot. And there might be more going on in that person's life than just their toe hurting. So to recognize something is that you're naming it. You're naming the problem versus jumping to an apology. And you're also making that person know what you are actually sorry for.
Mm-hmm. And it's important that in this recognition that we don't actually place blame anywhere. Mm-hmm. You know, we're just recognizing the hurt. So for example, if someone were to step on my toes, the recognize for that for them could be, hey, I recognize that your feet hurt now, and that would be the recognize.
Yeah. So in another setting or in another conversation, recognizing that, hey, I know that I might not have responded to that conversation properly. Or I recognize that this is really brave that you are having this conversation with me. So any way that we could recognize and name the courage or the feeling that a person has is going to help continue with this recovery model.
So the next step is very, very close to the first one in the recognition. Because if you're truly recognizing what the other person is going through, you're probably already empathizing. Empathizing is, like we talked about in the video previously, when we take the perspective of another person, when we try to imagine what's going on with them. The most important parts when empathizing are to avoid jumping to conclusions and avoid judging.
So the next letter in the react model is the A. A person's already recognized, already empathized, and now is the time to apologize. I'm really sorry that I hurt you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So if we're putting it all in context together, we have recognize, your toes are hurt because they were stepped on. That must really hurt. I'm so sorry.
So the C in the react model stands for collaborate, and I really love this part. So to collaborate is to have someone's buy-in or support to make sure something's not going to happen again, and that both people's opinions and voices are heard moving forward with maybe policies, directions, or questions.
And it's important to know that throughout this collaboration process, it doesn't necessarily have to be this 50-50 split that everyone is like, okay, I'm bringing this and you're bringing this. Sometimes it can be as simple as saying, hey, what can I do to make this better? Or, hey, what can I do to prevent this from happening in the future?
So the T in the react model stands for thank. And I like this one as well. But we have to thank people for their time, for their buy-in, for their interest in collaboration,
and their emotional labor. So we're going to put this all together. We're going to use a different example than this accidentally stepping on someone's toes example, because maybe that's not so relevant to sex and sexuality conversations. And Jess and I are going to kind of act that out for you. So I'll take the role of the parent and caring adult if you want to take the role of the young person.
Sounds good.
All right, awesome. Hey, can we talk?
Sure.
So earlier you asked me what a clitoris was, and I didn't really give you an answer. I just want to recognize that that might have been confusing or awkward for you, and I wanted to apologize.
Thank you for apologizing. It did make me feel like I was asking the wrong question.
Well, I just want you to know that that's not a wrong question. In fact, I really appreciate your curiosity around this. Honestly, I don't really know a lot of information about it, so what's one way that we can maybe learn about these things together?
Maybe we could take a look at Google and we could see if there's any resources for us to make sure we're going to have some good conversations.
Absolutely. I think Googling things can sometimes lead to a lot of intense images or intense information, so maybe I'll do some Googling by myself, and then I'll find some resources that we can go through together. That
sounds great.
Okay, let's do that. And thank you so much for taking the time to have this second conversation with me. I appreciate it.
For sure. Thank you, too. Earlier in the presentation, I mentioned something called a door slammer. And door slammers are something that we really want to avoid when we're having conversations with young people.
So, a door slammer is something that you might recognize from movies or TV shows, kind of like whenever a young person or an adult is frustrated and they run to their room and they slam the door. We want to try to avoid those moments because often they represent a really intense breakdown in communication, and we want to make sure that communication keeps going as much as possible.
Yeah, for sure. Door slammers can look so many different ways. It can be quite literally a door slam, or it could be, you're too young to have this conversation, or what are you doing having sex? Why are you asking me about the clitoris?
Mm-hmm.
We really want to make sure that we keep the door open with young people. Otherwise, they'll get the information from other places that may not be credible or may be giving them too much information. And as we said, parents and caring adults are one of the best resources for young people.
To wrap up, today we talked about various communication styles. We talked about response styles. We talked about apathy and empathy and sympathy. We talked about passive, aggressive, and assertive.
We talked about a lot.
We talked about a lot.
We talked about a little bit about door slammers.
And we talked about the RISE model and the REACT model.
Yeah. And we really are going to ask that you spend some time practicing so you have a little bit of homework, and also checking out some of the videos that we've referenced in this clip.
Mm-hmm. If at any time you need to review anything in this video, please feel free to rewind, go to different sections. We'll have timestamps in the description. In addition to that, we want to say thank you again to our generous sponsors, the Richland County Foundation, for their support. We couldn't make this content without you. We also want to offer up that Jess and I are available for personalized sessions. It can be kind of a one-on-one deal. It can be with a group. Any of those things in terms of providing education and direct feedback on these different communication styles.
And practice. We said practice could be awkward if you're by yourself. We can practice and we could pitch some really lifelike scenarios to you through Zoom.
So if you're interested in those more personalized workshops, check out the link in the description below and we'll get you hooked up.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think we could sign off with this video. Thank you all for communicating with us. Thank you all for spending your time learning about these really important models. And most importantly,
thanks for circling up. Bye.